land of Babylon, there lived a rabbi and his son, who made their home in a small hut deep in the forest, where they spent their days in the study of the mysteries of the Torah. During the day, they read from the sacred texts, and at night they peered into the stars and read in them as clearly as in any book, and they were the purest souls to be found in that land. In those days, the Jews of Babylon led lives of peace, for since the days of Daniel, there had always been a Jewish advisor to the king who had protected the interests of his people. There was a remarkable tradition connected to the appointment of this minister, for since the time of Daniel, each king had kept a golden chest beside the throne, and in that chest was a precious book, and that book could be opened only by one man in each generation who was destined to serve as the king's minister. In the past, this one man had always been found among the Jews of Babylon, and now it was time once again to seek out the one who would advise the king. But this time, none of those who journeyed to the palace from every city in Babylon was able to open the book. The Jews of Babylon began to worry, for the longer they went on without a Jewish minister, the more dangerous it was, since there was no one to look out for them. So they sent out messengers on horseback to inform all those Jews living in small towns of how important it was to come to the palace and try to open the book in the presence of the king. Many came, but none succeeded. The messengers were sent out again, this time to seek those living in the most remote villages and in the forest. In this way, a messenger learned of the rabbi and his son living alone deep in the woods, and he sought them out. Now the rabbi and his son were happy to welcome the messenger, for few visitors ever came to their door. And when they learned of his mission, they agreed at once to the journey to the palace and to attempt to open the book. Then the messenger took his leave and rode off to search for any others who might have been missed. And the rabbi and his son set off on foot to reach the capital. While they walked, the rabbi and his son spoke of the mysterious book, the book that only one man in each generation could open. It had been delivered, so the legend went, to Daniel by an angel while he sat inside the lion's den. He had read it while he waited there in the presence of the lions, and from it he had learned that he was the first mortal to open the book, and that only one man in each generation after him would be able to do so. It was said that the secrets in that book were so deep that they had not been revealed even to the angels. Both the rabbi and his son longed to read that book and share in those mysteries. So involved did the rabbi and his son become in their contemplation of this mysterious book that for 4 days and nights they did not even know if it was light or dark. And when at last they stopped walking and looked around, they found themselves in a strange place which they did not recognize at all, for they had paid no attention to the path on which they were walking and had become totally lost. Yet they did not become frightened. They had complete faith that God would not lead them astray. They walked on, and in the distance they saw a beautiful palace, which shone as if it were made of pearl. Around it was a high wall, and when they reached the wall, they found the gate locked. They peered through the gate and marveled at the beauty of the palace in the distance. Their hearts were drawn to it, and they longed to enter. Yet how could they pass through the gate? It was then that the first miracle occurred, for that gate only opened once every 100 years, and then only for the briefest instant. Fate had seen to it that the rabbi and his son had arrived there at exactly the moment it was set to fly open, and when it did open, they did not hesitate. They both rushed through the gate before it slammed shut. Now when the rabbi and his son found themselves standing inside the garden in the grounds of the palace before it, they were were filled with joy. They hurried to the door of the palace and found in it a golden key. They turned the key and entered. Inside the palace they found an old woman with beautiful, wise eyes. She was taking leaves out of a silver basket and crushing them between her fingers into a fine powder, which she let fall into the golden basket at her side. When the rabbi and his son entered, she looked up. She did not seem surprised to see them. They approached her, and the rabbi said, "Peace be with you, Shalom Aleichem." "Ah, peace be with you, Alechem Shalom," she replied. When the rabbi asked her what she was doing, she replied, "I have children everywhere who suffer from one Sabbath, one Shabbat to the next. But on the eve of the Sabbath, on the Shabbat, I take the powder made from these leaves and cast it into the wind. And the wind carries it to the four corners of the earth, so that all those who breathe in even the smallest speck have a taste of paradise, and the Sabbath is filled with joy for them." The rabbi and his son marveled at this, for they had known the peace and joy of Shabbat, the Sabbath, and now they knew why. Then they were both very curious to know who the old woman was, and the rabbi asked her name. She replied that it was Sarah. Then he asked her what was her husband's name, and she told them it was Avraham. And when he heard this, the rabbi wondered if she not be the same Sarah that was the mother of all the Jewish people. The woman just nodded that it was true. Then they asked her where Abraham was, and she told them that he had gone into the Garden of Eden to fetch freshly fallen leaves for her. It was then that the rabbi's son, who had not yet reached his bar mitzvah, saw the hand of fate in their coming to that place. He told Sarah of the journey they had set out on, to attempt to open the book that had once belonged to Daniel. She nodded as the young boy spoke, and then she said, "That book can be opened only by one who has the purest soul. And while both of your souls are very pure, they are not pure enough to open the book." The rabbi and his son were very sorry to hear that, for they had hoped that at least one of them might be able to succeed. The rabbi said, "But tell us, Sarah, is there any way we can purify our souls enough so we may open the book?" And Sarah replied, "Yes, there is one way. You must descend into Miriam's well and purify yourselves in those sacred waters." Now both the rabbi and his son had heard of Miriam's well. That was the well that had followed the children of Israel in their desert wanderings, the well God had given them in honor of the righteousness of Miriam. Miriam, sister of Moses and Aaron, Moshe and Aharon. But that had not been since the days of the wandering in the wilderness. However, if it were possible for them to find Sarah, perhaps it was also possible to find Miriam's well. The rabbi asked Sarah where the well could be found, and she told them that they would come to it if they followed the path outside the palace. But she also told them that it would be futile to go there, for the evil one had placed serpents all around the entrance to the well. This bad news greatly saddened both the rabbi and his son, for they had felt so near their goal, and now again it seemed impossible to reach. With a sad voice, the boy asked Sarah if there were any way to get past the serpents. Sarah smiled and said yes, but only with the help of Miriam's tambourine. Once again, hope burned in their hearts, and they wondered where they might find Miriam's tambourine, and if it were the same one that she had played after the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea. So they asked Sarah about this, and she told him that it was indeed the very same tambourine which the maidens of Israel had played as they danced at the Red Sea. When they asked her where they might find it, she said simply, "Why, with Miriam, of course." And when they asked where Miriam could be found, Sarah told them that if they went through that palace into the garden and passed through a hollow tree, they would find the entrance to a cave. And if they traveled through that cave, they would reach the shore of the Red Sea. And there, at the shore of the Red Sea, they would find Miriam, for that is where she made her home. Of course, all of this was much more than the rabbi and his son had expected. Yet they did not hesitate, but each thanked Sarah with all his heart, and they set off at once to find the cave. Before long, after passing through the most beautiful garden they had ever seen, they reached a magnificent tree. It turned out to be hollow, just as Sarah had said. And when they stepped into the hollow trunk, they found the entrance to a cave. They crawled through that long cave, mysteriously illuminated with a pale light, until they reached the shore of the sea. There they found a beautiful young woman sitting on a rock beside the shore and playing a tambourine, with schools of fish crowded around her and dolphins doing turns in the air. As soon as they had heard the wonderful rhythm of that tambourine, both the rabbi and his son were spellbound and began to dance. They danced with the greatest joy they had ever known, for they were feeling the same joy the Israelites had felt after they had escaped the clutches of the Egyptians by passing through the parted waters of the Red Sea. Now they might have danced there forever had the young woman not put down the tambourine. When she did, their feet came to rest, and they knew they had indeed found Miriam, the prophetess, and that the tambourine she played must be the very one they were seeking. The rabbi and his son introduced themselves to Miriam and told her of their quest. She hesitated not a moment, but handed them the tambourine and said, "Go, and God willing, you will expel the serpents nesting there. For know that none of us who inhabit this place can accomplish that, only mortals such as yourselves who have found your way here. Meanwhile, I will wait for you to return, for this is my home beside the sea. Know that the sound of this tambourine has great power. It causes those with pure souls to be filled with joy, and evil creatures to cringe and flee as fast as they can. Now please hurry, for if I go as long as a day without hearing the music of my tambourine, my eternal life will come to an end." The rabbi and his son knew that if Miriam were willing to trust them with her miraculous tambourine, their quest must be very precious in her eyes indeed. The rabbi gratefully accepted the tambourine from her and held it with great care, as he and his son took their leave and hurried back to the cave. They passed through the cave and then the tree until they found their way into the garden and onto the path before the palace. At last they came to the very well they had been seeking. It was set deep within the earth, surrounded by stones that had long ago fused together. Somehow, that miraculous well with its living waters had followed the Israelites as they wandered from place to place and had given them fresh water to drink. But now the rabbi and his son both saw a multitude of serpents were nesting at its entrance, depriving the world of its wonderful powers. Then they approached the well and knew they had reached the most solemn moment of their lives. When they stood there, all the serpents raised their heads as if to strike, but they paid them no heed. The rabbi handed the tambourine to his son and told him to start to play. Then the boy struck the tambourine for the first time, and as soon as he did, Wonderful, spellbinding music emerged from it with a strong, insistent rhythm. This time the rabbi and his son were not compelled to dance, for Miriam was not playing. Instead, the sounds made all the serpents writhe in agony, and they began to slither and crawl away from there as fast as they could go. They headed directly for the garden gate and slipped beneath it, never to return. And the purity of the well and the garden were restored at last. Then, while his son continued to play the tambourine, the rabbi found that the wonderful music gave him the strength to climb down the stones inside the well. When he reached the water and immersed himself, he felt his soul purified to its very kernel. So it was that when the rabbi climbed out of the well, he took the tambourine from his son and played its wonderful music once again, and his son descended into those life-giving waters and likewise purified his soul. And when they departed from that place, they found that their eyes had been opened, and that all manner of angels and spirits had flocked around that garden, and they now became apparent to them. Then they hurried back to the hollow tree and passed through the cave, for they wanted to take the tambourine back to Miriam as soon as possible. It was not long before they stood before her shining beauty, and when they returned the tambourine, she blessed them both and told them that their wonderful deed would always be remembered. After that, the rabbi and his son hurried back to the gate of the garden, which could always be opened from the inside, and took their leave following the path. And lo and behold, by morning, they found themselves standing before the palace of the king. Before they were given an audience, and like so many had come before them, they approached the book that had been sealed for so long. The rabbi had only to touch the cover of the book lightly, and it opened to him. And all who surrounded him cheered, for the new minister of the king had finally been found. Thus it came to pass that the rabbi became the king's trusted advisor and served him for many years, referring to the book for every important decision and making certain that his fellow Jews were spared any persecution. And when the rabbi took his leave of this world, they did not have to look far to find the one who would take his place. For his son, who had also immersed himself in Miriam's well and had been cleansed as fully as his father, had no difficulty in opening the book and understanding its wisdom. He too served as the king's minister for many years, and that was a time of abundance for the Jews of that land.